Hello. I hope you're all doing well. I am sick and I completely, like, somehow totally threw my back out. This is where I wish I could write all of you and say, hey, can I have an extra day and can we finish the semester on Friday instead of Thursday? But I think we all want to be done on Thursday. So I'm going to power through it. Am I going to be my best self? No, probably not. So this is it, right? 4 days until the class is over. All of you have made it this far. And for a lot of us, it probably means we get a month off until the fall semester starts. So regardless of what any of you are doing for the rest of the summer, I hope you have a great time. Yeah, even though we've been online, it really has been cool. Like just kind of getting to know a lot of you and just communicating back and forth, and that's been really neat for me. And I don't, it's different in person, but it's, yeah, I don't know. I think it's been really cool, and I feel like I've gotten to know some of you just as well as I would have if we were in a class together. So that's been something kind of different and neat about this semester for me. So, and I want to thank all of you for just kind of a wonderful summer. Do we call it term or semester, whatever we want to say? So, one thing to note, I'm going to do a lot of reading off of this because, like I said, I'm in rough shape. As my wife says, she goes, "Man down," because I guess in the middle of the night I was like, ah. Not, yeah. Anyways, I don't like being sick. So one thing about I will read a lot, and I'll probably get distracted like I am right now. Okay, I'm gonna try and focus and get through some of this. One thing to note about final grades, I will work to have them all completed by the end of the week. So hopefully Sunday, Monday, those grades will be done. Do remember that 20% of your grade is participation, right? And the syllabus, it kind of lists some key points, including interacting with peers, mostly through Canvas, in a timely and thoughtful and respectful manner, right? So a decent part of that participation grade comes from how you've all interacted in those kind of open discussions that were posted like week 3, week 4, week 5, and there's another one this week. So, right, I mean, that's your main opportunity to interact with each other and kind of get ideas and present your own ideas. And obviously that peer-to-peer stuff sometimes is the most important part of class culture, right? The students usually set the kind of tone and the pace for, the culture of the classroom. So, yeah, right? Like I'm sure everybody who normally or regularly participates in those discussions, you probably all feel closer to each other. So, and as I kind of covered before, right, those points that grade isn't converted to points until the end of the semester, and I really kind of go back and look through those discussions. But I just want to let you know that it can affect your final grade. It can raise it. It can lower it. It can kind of do those things just depending on how you interacted in those kind of open discussions. So before we move on to the final assignments, there's two. I have dirt under my fingernails because when I was sick, I left the hose on and it flooded the backyard, which I killed a bunch of my flowers and my wife's flowers, and so I was digging them up. Anyways, that's a whole different thing. The dahlias are, I think like 2 of them are going to die, which is really sad because they're really pretty. So, oh my God. Okay, I'm a little off. Okay, because both assignments for this short week revolve around more creative aspects of communicating. So I wanted to talk a bit about creative writing. And I'm taking this kind of modified, something I normally would teach about poetry in English 122, and sort of modified it to fit fiction. So if you hear the word poetry a lot, just know that a lot of this stuff also applies to fiction, script writing. It can apply to physical art, painting, right? Principles of art are, a lot of them are the same principles, right? So what is poetry? What is fiction, right? How do we define those things? Any definitive definition that you think of, that you think you can come up with, can be countered by a literary theorist or a successful poet or successful writer who will define it differently, right? So in fiction and poetry, it really, it's mercurial, right? It really escapes being defined. But we can look at some important and kind of dominant characteristics over history and what is happening now, right? So, some literary theorists rely less on the opposition of prose to poetry. Modernist poets essentially do not distinguish between the creation of the poem with the words and the creative acts in other media, right? So, my main point about that is, if you feel like you have a set in stone notion of what fiction and what poetry is, you probably want to discard that, and just because it's not going to be right. Right? Poetry doesn't have to rhyme. It doesn't have to have a structured form. It doesn't have to have a particular meter. It doesn't have to be short. It doesn't have to be long. Just like fiction doesn't have to prescribe to preconceived notions that you might have about it, right? So if you think back to your, I don't know, like ninth grade Greek lessons, right? Poesis, right? In Greek, it just means making, right? So, and while we cannot define poetry and fiction in general, we can pick out some dominant characteristics of each. Do dominant characteristics in things like poetry and fiction, do they stay static, or do they change and evolve over time? This is where being in a classroom would help, because we could actually have a nice conversation. But they change, right? So like any fashion trends, they change, right? For the time being, we seem to be adhering to some of the same characteristics that impacted poetry and fiction in the mid to late 20th century. Ezra Pound was once asked to define the dominant characteristics of poetry, 20th century poetry, and he said he could do it in one word, and that one word was compression, right? So compression meaning, right, the act of pressing something into smaller space, or putting pressure on it from different sides until it gets smaller. So Pound was talking about the compression of language. Right, so the dominant characteristic was that poets didn't just use language, right? And before this, there were romantic poets, and that's where you get a lot of really longer poetry and descriptions. So, a lot of times trends, well, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do that. Like, I'm going to rebel against this and that. So compression is kind of a rebellion against more like kind of flowery, longer, like romanticism poetry. So they use compressed language, right? So, and compressed language is really like, you could think of, like, you ever use Twitter and you're typing something and you run out of characters. I don't know if there's a character limit anymore, but there used to be. There probably still is, right? So you run out of characters, and what do? Right? You have to decide what to remove from your tweet, right? And you have to kind of compress it until you can make it mean what you want it to within that space, right? So, right, you start taking out words, you start rewording. So that's kind of the fundamental of compression, is just considering every word and getting rid of all the unnecessary words, and to reword and rephrase work to create the compression of language, right? So fiction writers, right? Creative not fiction and creative nonfiction and a lot of other things. They also work hard to consider taking out unnecessary words. So really in polished art, you don't want to have more than you want in there, right? You want to be, for the most part, unless you don't want to be, you want to be intentional and you want to be mindful of what you're using and how you're using it. So, so think of compression in like if you were to make a stew, right? You'd put everything in a pot, you let it simmer, and eventually the evaporation of the water would condense the flavor, right? So in those examples of water, it would be the unnecessary words, right? You don't want to, unless you do, your creative writing to be the equivalent of a watery stew. So generally the trend is to kind of have a concentrated, powerful flavor, right? In creative writing, you can often get that by removing unnecessary words and by compressing the language. And the same thing in fiction, by kind of really being intentional and mindful of what words you're using and getting rid of unnecessary words in the editing process, you can kind of condense it. So in my mind, compression is a key principle for poetry. Compression in my mind is not as important in fiction writing. I still think it can be, but it doesn't necessarily always have the same weight. I'm going to start trying to read faster because otherwise it's going to take me a really long time and you're going to get really bored. So it's important to note that even essays that use compression also often stand to be more effective. You don't necessarily want to compress an entire essay, right? You don't want to make it so compressed that nobody can get through it, but removing unnecessary words in sections and parts of it can be a great benefit. So, think of compression. Also think if you want breathing room, right, and kind of how to achieve that. Most effective creative writing contains certain elements. Again, we see similarities between effective poetry, essay writing, and creative writing, such as fiction, creative nonfiction. Some of the most effective elements in poetry and other creative forms of writing include, I listed 4 things. So I believe exploration, risk, imagination, and the compression of language, right? As far as exploration goes, poetry and fiction, like other art forms, they often work to make things new. So often we explore things that are already out there and we explore them in a way to make it new. So what does that mean? What does that mean to make something new or to make it fresh, right? And why is having something new or fresh important for readers? Well, we can talk about it a little bit. So we know we don't want stale writing, right? And in essays and in creative works, stale writing, it often is found, there's an abundance of cliches, right? So it's important to get away from cliches in writing academically. Things like songs or in speech or in casual letters, completely different. What is a cliche, right? And like I said, they can work in music, but that's for a totally different reason. A cliche, right? It's an expression or an idea or element of an artistic work which has become so overused to the point of losing its original meaning or effect, even to the point of being trite or irritating, especially when at some earlier time it was considered meaningful, right? And for some reason, fiction and poetry are often like magnets, drawing writers to use cliches. So you want to try to resist that. What are cliches, right? So I don't want to get too far into it, but they're just some of them are just little short expressions like "boys will be boys," right? That would be a cliche. And what does that even mean? When it rains, it pours, right? So all these little phrases that we've heard, except when it doesn't. Dress to kill, right? It just doesn't even make sense, right? So things like I've heard it a million times. Oh, really? Is that true? Or I've seen it a million times. It lasted forever. Did it really? Only time will tell. Or until you figure it out. Against all odds. Yawn. Right? Thinking outside of the box. Right? That expression is really, at this point, so cliche that it's completely inside the box. So, yeah, I would ask you if we were in a class, what are some other cliches? We'd talk about it. This would be a whole longer thing, but that's for a different class. So in part, cliches are these little expressions that we've heard kind of over and over again, right? And in most of your writing, like I said, songwriting is different. You want to avoid using an abundance of cliches. When I think about cliches in writing, that we all probably use at times, I think of a couple problems, right? So part of the problem is that for the writer, the cliche can act as a restraint. The writer uses cliches to express things that are often complex, that they are thinking about, instead of finding a new insight or making it new, or making a powerful expression of thought or idea. The expression comes out as a non-original and in an overused way, right? So using cliches often relaxes the thought process and the imagination. It allows the writer to write lazy, right? Instead of strengthening their imagination and exploration skills, readers often view cliches as unoriginal and boring, and they often view the writer as being ignorant or lazy. I wish I could, I can't even sit. My back is messed up. I can't even sit up, and I really want to. I'm going to try. Oh, all that for, okay. Right, and so obviously, if the cliches just kind of run through your head and you're not really activating your imagination, right, there's benefits to sustained mental exertion, right? So in terms of exploring, the writer, instead of searching for something original, becomes satisfied with finding so thoroughly used by others that the writer's intention often has very little impact, right? So in terms of imagination, if you're using cliches, you're essentially using somebody else's imagination. Be yourself. Everybody is already taken. It's a quote from Mark Twain. In terms of risk, you are most likely not taking any risk that hasn't been taken by the millions of other people who have written the same cliche. And I always kind of think, like, do you remember the first time that you rode a bike or drove, right? How that experience was, right? Like, it's exciting, it's something new. And then, as you kind of drive more and more or rode your bike more and more, right? It kind of just becomes part of the routine, right? So the cliche is kind of like that area where it's just part of the routine, and you really want to, you can't always do it, but you want to at least try to find moments where, you're taking that reader on their very first car ride, right? Like I said, it's not realistic to do it all the time, but you want to try to bring that freshness at least some of the times. I wrote a poem, and in it I had a wolf howling, and sent it off. It didn't get published. I showed it to my buddy, and he was like, "Yeah, that's really cliche. You have a wolf howling in it." And so I just changed it to barking, right? Just one word. Instead of a wolf howling, it's a wolf barking. Suddenly the poem gets published in a really respectable place, and it was just that one little instance where I just got away from that cliche. So one or two lines in a poem, in a piece of fiction, right? They really can make a difference, right? If you think about movies that you've seen, oftentimes you remember two or three lines of things that really stood out. So yeah, music, I think it's different. For whatever reason, we enjoy cliches in music, or at least tolerate them more. And I think it just has to do with maybe the other stuff kind of backing it up, right? So same thing. So you're going to be doing a creative piece for this final assignment. And just like in our essays, right, you really want to try to find something that you're interested in writing about. Obviously, it's going to make it a lot easier to write if you're actually interested in it. So take some time to figure out what you want to write and try to find something that's interesting, or I don't know how, because I'm sick, it's hard to think of find the thing that's the least pain in the ass sounding, I guess. Um, yeah, so look over the lists in the assignment and see what interests you. If you hate everything that's in there, but you have a good idea, just email me, but email me like tomorrow and propose a different idea. And if it makes sense, I'll probably go for it. I, like many writers, I tend to explore smaller landscapes, right? So narrow and deep, right? You're digging a well, you're not making a swimming pool. This is just my process. I might write about myself or a person, maybe a relationship, an animal, maybe like a family. I might write about like a small crew on a boat or whatever, right? People at a factory. I don't try to write about things in like kind of broad, big strokes, right? I'm not going to write an overview of mass migration, right? Instead, I would focus on a person or a family and try to make a universal point through that, right? So I find that when I can write about smaller things, I can add the detail I need to add. I can give people personalities in a way that I could not give an entire culture a personality, right? So, could any of us really speak for a large entire group of people? No, not accurately, right? They're not the same. So if you kind of focus, I'm not saying that you can't, and maybe you can. I can't. So by focusing on smaller kind of groups, right, I can actually give each individual person in the story or in the poem like an actual personality, and then I'm not trying to speak for an entire group, like a larger culture. I'm just trying to speak for the family. And I can still make a universal point or larger points through writing about the smaller group. I always had an idea about a poem. I was thinking about the video game Donkey Kong, and like Priscilla's up there, she's bigger than Mario is, and Kong is never paying attention to her, right? She's not tied up. I just kind of have this idea in my mind. I don't know why I wrote it, of her actually coming down and beating Kong up and saving Mario, right? So, in a sense, that would be making something new again, right? We're all familiar with kind of like the setup in Donkey Kong, but to actually see it through a different perspective and a different lens and write about it, I could make it new again. Instead of telling the same story, I take the same thing that's there and I show you a different angle of it. Yeah, you could take a feminist perspective and write a poem about Priscilla freeing herself and saving Mario, right? So, and again, by focusing on something smaller and specific, you can often make larger kind of cultural or emotional points. So in effective writing, exploring often happens when you start asking questions about the things that interest you or stand out to you, the things that reoccur in your mind, memories and stuff like that. I had a Billy Collins poem, and I will read it. It's short, and it's him taking something and making it new again. So it's a poem talking about Smokey the Bear, right? So the kind of the wildfire, only you can prevent forest fires, bear. So Billy Collins takes that idea, right, which is something that we all know, and he puts a new perspective on it. And it's called Flames. Smokey the Bear heads into the autumn woods with a red can of gasoline and a box of wooden matches. His ranger's hat is crooked at a disturbing angle. His brown fur gleams under the hot, high sun as his paws, the size of catcher's mitts, crackle into the distance. He is sick of dispensing warnings to the careless, the half-wit camper, the dumbbell hiker. He is going to show them how a professional does it. Right? So in that's Billy Collins basically turning Smokey the Bear into the arsonist, right? Or the one who's going to start the fire, right? So again, he's taking something, this concept of Smokey the Bear that we all know, and he's making it new again. Okay. Last thing I can think of in regards to exploration is pay attention to the things that are around you, the images you see in your imagination. Listen to people, listen to yourself. Try not to judge yourself for your thoughts, right? Even ones that reside in what Carl Jung would call our shadows. We're all beautifully human. So what is risk in essay or creative writing? First off, I do want to say that you don't have to take any big risks that make you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, right? I like to encourage risk, but there are a lot of factors to consider. So you have to judge about what risks you are willing to take. And if you don't feel risky now, you might in the future. So don't write anything that exceeds your threshold. I don't want you to be traumatized by your own writing. And that can happen. You can write something so risky that you can kind of feel traumatized. As a rule in this class, I don't need to say that. I just obviously be respectful of each other. I'm the only one who's going to read these things, but one of the cool things about risking in writing is that you can be a shy person, right? And whatever, have the voice of a lion, right? So I'm sure a lot of us are introverts, or would consider ourselves introverts. I'm an introvert. I know how to act like an extrovert at times, but naturally I'm an introvert, and I imagine that probably quite a few students who take online classes would probably call themselves introverts. Sometimes for people who are a little more introverted or feel that way, it's easier to take a risk in writing than standing in front of a big group and saying something, right? So I ask why, but you're not here to answer that, right? But you know it. A lot of times you can put something really assertive in a piece of writing that you would not feel comfortable standing in front of a group of people and saying, right? In writing, there can be even physical risk in writing. It's not really what I'm talking about, but like Salman Rushdie, Martin Luther King, right? Their writing was so risky that it created physical risks. Much more common and more what I mean is an emotional risk. And an emotional risk would be like, have you ever told somebody that you love them, or like told somebody a deep secret? Have you ever argued in a moment where normally you would have been passive, or kind of confessed something, right? Known risks, the risks that we know, right? A lot of times they're accompanied by kind of a guttural feeling, right? So something that you would feel in your chest or in your stomach, right? You're like, oh man, like that was scary, right? So a lot of times when you're taking a risk in your writing, you will still feel it like kind of like in your chest or in your stomach area, right? And thoughts like, oh, I can't say that, but then you decide you want to, or I hope my parents don't read that, which is a lot of my poems. I'm like, man, I hope my parents don't hang out on that internet all the time, right? And it could be like thoughts like, oh, I can't believe I had that thought. And, I think most of us have those thoughts, right? And if anybody is kind of as like OCD and intrusive thoughts, just know that you're not alone. A lot of people, a lot of us have those kind of things. So in many ways, risk is about being you, right? Right? It's not the perfect, polished you. It's not the you or the me that I would want to necessarily present in the most public of places, but it's about kind of being the flawed and the lovable you, the human, right? The real you. So, and part of the reason it's good is if you've ever heard someone say or read something that makes you feel better because all of a sudden you realize you're not alone, or that somebody struggles the same way, or somebody sees the world in a similar way. How does that feel? It often feels really good and reassuring. You're like, oh my God, I don't feel alone. Other people feel this way. This writer feels the way that I do, right? That person took a risk enough to say and write something that kind of you or me, that I kind of kept in my own shadows, right? So, and risk invites you to pay it back, right? Just like you've benefited, it invites you to speak of being human and let somebody else know that they are also not alone in the world, right? Risk invites you to be emotionally vulnerable, and it isn't easy. It's typically one of the hardest things about writing, right? You can risk in your essays and in your creative works. Many essays take up controversial topics. They thrust the author's opinions and findings into the world. And so do many pieces of fiction and creative nonfiction, right? And many writers start out by taking small risks and gradually go from there, right? Do you dive in? Do you wade in? It's really a personal choice. Risks, you can play with the format of the piece. That might feel risky. The structure, the line breaks. For some, the act of creative writing itself is risky. Writing a fictional piece will feel risky, right? Yeah, you don't have to risk and point to yourself if you don't want to, right? You can risk and put it out into the world. And remember, no matter what, your characters are not you, no matter what, who's like, I forget the guy's name. Somebody created Freddy Krueger as a character, and he's a really nice guy. The writer's really sweet. Characters are not you, right? And we never want to read somebody's work and go, oh, that character's them. They're not. They might have elements of them. They might share some similarities, but the characters are not the writers. Personal risk is just that. It's personal. It's not what you think other people would see as a risk. It's what you feel as a risk. For some people, speaking about their emotions is enough risk. I'm running out of water. I am getting through this, though. So when you read through the poetry packet this week, that's what I put up. Just think a little bit about how the authors risk, how they explore, how they often work to make things new again, how they use words, how they often don't waste, how they compress things, just all the stuff that we just talked about. Okay. So that's that. So some of us have been talking in the open discussion, and the thought is, let's not do another essay. So you can thank your active peers who were part of that discussion for making that happen, for not having to write another essay. So they kind of helped me see the importance of maybe doing something else. And I think that's really cool. So what we have decided as a group, in lieu of an essay, is let's all create our own pieces of creative literature. So specifically, I am thinking fiction or creative nonfiction. So those would be my two categories. If you have a real big hankering to do something else, email me tomorrow and let me know what you want to do, and then we can kind of talk about it. So what better way to absorb many of the principles than to create ourselves, right? So, you think about all the stuff in the class that we've learned. It can be it'll actually probably be more effective than writing another essay. It would be actually applying those principles in our own creative work. Am I qualified to teach something like creative writing? Oh, you want me to brag? No, I don't want to brag. I should be modest. Oh, really? You insist? Okay, well, if you insist. I do have 2 master's degrees. One of them is English. I also have a master's of fine art degree in creative writing. So on a professional writing level, like getting paid to write level, it's my creative writing that sells. And I guess, to be fair, it's the only writing that I've ever tried to sell. So I have a lot of pieces that are published nationally and internationally, right? I have a poetry collection. Yeah, I don't want to talk too much about it because I feel weird. So, but if you Google, it's like an Anchorman where I could be like, I'm kind of a big deal. I have lots of leather-bound books. Yeah, I have a pretty good idea how to write creatively. And if you got curious and actually wanted to see stuff that I wrote, you could just, if you typed in Ivan Hobson poetry, you would see a bunch of stuff. So, yeah, whatever. I have also, this I want you to know, I've also judged and will probably continue to judge the DVC fiction and poetry contest. So the next time that comes up, please submit something, because you can win money, and you might win money. Yeah, so here's the plan. At some point, just do like a free write, kind of look over the list, generate some ideas, use a blank literary elements page. I am not going to collect those, to help you create your own piece of literature, right? Seeing all those elements can kind of help you define certain things for yourself. You don't have to stick to it. Just fill it out, what comes to your mind. You're not turning them in, so you can use it to help just make a frame for yourself. Or not. That's up to you. Do at least review the literary elements list, because it'll kind of, you'll just be mindful of different things. One of the hallmarks of effective creative writing, as with any art, is exploration. Please read, I think I posted it, Why I'm Not an Artist by Frank O'Hara, right? It's a poem. A lot of times we start a creative piece and it changes and we write into it. And that's okay, right? Sometimes it's good to surprise ourselves. Exploration can lead you to unexpected places, and often those unexpected places are how we create art, right? And how we make things new again, right? So don't worry. If you start writing about oranges, but you end up writing about Corvettes, that is part of the artistic process, or it oftentimes is. And it shows that your imagination is really active and moving. So to make something new again is often to bring our new and unique point of view. So fill out the element sheet knowing that it might change. That'll at least give you some grounding. in the group discussion that we had, we also agreed to a set of guidelines, which will be like, pick two things from here, pick two things from here, pick two things from here. Again, if you want to do something different or radically different, just email me and we can kind of figure that out. So, and there's no reason why you couldn't take a story and set it in outer space or under the ocean or wherever. You know, it's your universe. You get to create that universe. Maybe there's another Central California that exists on whatever, Mars, right? Or some upside down world. So in those things, there's going to be setting. You'll pick two things from that. I don't know if I changed them, but you would pick two of these 5 options, either set in Central Valley of California. I wouldn't care that much. If you wanted to set it in the Central Valley on Pluto and it happened to be a lot like our Central Valley, I would accept that. Set in a working class environment, set in a multicultural space that has tension between cultures, set in a space that has noticeable economic disparities, defined time period. I kind of picked like 1850s, the 1930s, the 1940s, or the 1980s. That seems to be where a lot of the reading was centered. Then you would pick from the voices. So, and again, these are all principles that we've kind of covered. Write a character with a narrative voice, a strong feminist perspective. Then there's one with a strong sociological perspective. You could write a character with a strong psychological viewpoint or perspective. And then there's another one for ecological kind of viewpoint or perspective. And then I think I might have put one in that's like a character that's driven by fallacies, right? And then we have a conflict resolution thing. Create a piece that contains underlying tone of resilience, another one with the underlying tone of hopelessness, another one that contains socioeconomic exploration or conflict, another one that's create a piece that contains underlying tones of determination. So you'll see there's a lot of crossover, and that's okay. And then the last little bit, I just wrote down a bunch of things that I could think of kind of stream of conscious that helped me write. Just start writing a lot. In other words, I just let my hand keep writing, right? And by the way, there's a different connection whether you're using your hand to write or using the keyboard. You got to figure out which one works better for you. I will often switch off. They just link different things to your brain, right? It's a different process, and it can affect creativity. I write, I let go, I write fast, I let my imagination take the lead, and I don't worry about spelling and grammar in that first draft. I put that all in the back seat. Once I've generated the material, then I usually look to organize it. So what I do is, in that free write, you can write so fast and free. If you can get to that point, you can actually kind of let your subconscious bubble up a little bit and go into the writing, right? So there's just a point where you can kind of, or at least for me, I can kind of let go and different things start happening in the writing. Once I have a lot of material, then I look to compress it, right? I believe that every single word I write counts. Everything wants a purpose in creative writing, not set in stone rules. They're just, like I said, these are guidelines. These are my personal thing. There are different ways of writing, just my opinion. I don't think anything is set in stone about creative writing. I do believe in those pillars: exploration, right? The greater, seek to explore something that is new or explore something in a new way. Imagination to think beyond cliches and kind of expand thought. To risk something of myself. Most of the times that's an emotional thing. So be brave, use your imagination and explore something. We often forget that people have 5 senses. If you can engage more than one sense, right? You often pull your reader more into that space, right? So if you start engaging other senses of your reader, you're going to take them more into that world that you've created. Remember, villains, they see themselves as heroes, right? Villains should have their own justifications for doing what they do. Villains, usually good villains, they believe in their causes. They believe that they're the hero, right? One good note of conflict in story writing, we always use this, or a lot of times use this. You pit two characters against them where if what I want is directly opposed to what the other one wants, right? So what one character wants is directly opposed to what the other character wants. That sets up just immediate, like real harsh conflict. Right. Remember, think about what your characters want and what they really want. You know, what's at the core of what they want, right? You're looking at a meaning that is below the surface. That meaning is what can be said. It can also be what is not said. We all have secrets and secret desires. Sometimes what we don't say illuminates those things for other people. And it's the same with your characters. Sometimes what your characters don't say can be the most telling. Remember, the physical form that you present can have an impact on your piece, right? These do not need to be in MLA format. That would be weird for the most part if they were. You do not have to double space. You can if you want to. You don't have to use any particular font. Use the page to convey meaning, right? That's a consideration. You don't have to, but you certainly can. One thing I know, it can take you 10 years to finish a piece. It can take you an hour, and often we can't tell what it'll be, right? Art is often never finished. We have a saying, art isn't finished, it's just abandoned, right? Almost everything I've written feels unfinished to me, even the published stuff, right? There's just a point where I feel like it's time to let go, put it out in the world. You might write better in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, with music, without music. Try to find the time and the setting when you are the most creative, right? For me, that's usually late at night, right? That's why I might write a response to you at 3 in the morning because I'm trying to distract myself or from writing or finishing something. When it's quiet, that's when my imagination is really going. But it's different for everyone. This is a big one. When you can write. When you can't write, you edit, right? So when you feel creative, write, express it. When you feel blocked or like you can't write, that's when you go back and edit. That will keep you from having that writer's block, right? Often creative writing, 10% creation. We say like 90% drudgery, right? That 10% is spectacular. That 10% of the time when the piece just comes to life, when your imagination is firing, when you are saying something that has not been said, or saying it in a way that hasn't been said, right? It's amazing, right? It's beautiful. The other 90%, it's editing. It's often editing, and it's often drudgery. Sometimes you don't have to edit. Sometimes, very rarely for me, but once or twice a year, I write a piece and I hardly need to edit it. Most of the time, so they might go through like 40, 50 drafts, might go through 10 drafts, it might go through 100 drafts. That part, I don't like so much. I pretty much want everyone to write some form of fiction or creative nonfiction piece. Like I said, if you really want to do something else, email me. And email me if you would want to do like script writing or write a scene. Just the page count will be different on that. What do I want in these creative pieces? Most importantly, I want your unique voice. Um, this is so stupid. So I did a similar assignment in English 122, and I got two like chat GPT stories out of it, and it made me want to pull my hair out. And I ended up failing both students. One of them got a D, one of them got an F, and that's that. There's no, I got it. It's extra upsetting in creative work, right? Because for me, I'm like, why? Like, really? Like, why would you do that? Like, it's not, I'm not sitting there like with a microscope trying to judge your work. I don't judge you for not being able to write a publishable story, right? I just want things that have heart and effort, right? So just know that I don't care if you don't have to sound like Sandra Cisneros or like Robert Frost. You don't have to be this grand, big voice. I just care about hearing your unique voice. And I want the pieces to have some heart and some effort into them. No matter what you do spend some time editing. I skipped over some stuff because now I feel like I'm making this sound scary. And I think I took out the scary sounding stuff. So all of you have been doing really wonderful work so far, at least vastly, the vast majority of you, so you got this. It's going to be great. And if you really messed it up somehow, I will probably let you rewrite this one. I'm also, I almost always enjoy reading student creative work. I love it. It's fun. And when it's really good, I steal it, and then I plagiarize it, and then I publish it, and then I get paid for it. Okay, I don't really do that. I don't expect any of the work to be perfect. Perfect to me is boring. Think about who you love the most in this world, right? Animals, people, right? Are they perfect? Are the ones that you love the most the perfect ones? No, not a chance, right? Often we love kind of like the quirks, we love the flaws the most, we love the silly things about people, right? Imperfection is what's often relatable and endearing to us, right? Perfection is often dull, it's hard to relate to, and it can be really hard to penetrate, right? So again, I don't want or need these to be any sort of perfect. I want you to have fun expressing yourself and exploring by creating a piece of creative writing. I want this to be funner than it would be for you to write another essay. This is meant to be more of a treat for like all of our hard work and a way to integrate things and a way to do something different. And I think that's about it. I think that's like all. I had something else I was going to say, but I forgot. But I just want to crawl into my bed, take some Theraflu, and just like sleep for a really long time. It's been a genuine pleasure getting to know all of you, and I've really enjoyed this summer semester. And hopefully I will be at DVC for a long time, and always love meeting people, especially people that I haven't actually met. And I'm here. So if you ever need help with kind of English stuff, or if you need a recommendation for college, I'm usually pretty good at those, or vouching for like people getting jobs, and hopefully I don't ever have to bail any of you out of jail, but I would consider it depending on the circumstances. So I don't think that's going to happen though. But anyways, it's been a pleasure. I will, oddly, even though we haven't spent time in the classroom together, I will miss all of you, and I hope you take care and have a great summer. All right, bye.